I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin, and pay my respects to their people past, present and future. And this is an excerpt from our Mapping Aboriginal Melbourne tool, where we're seeking to really capture the experiences of Aboriginal Melbourne and to share those experiences. And we've got a team called Aboriginal Melbourne who are largely leading and doing this work. So I've broken up my presentation into a couple of segments. I've really written it for those of you who are studying, and hopefully it'll be of interest as well to others I know who are practicing and not just studying. The first theme is be curious, and hopefully that'll become evident in my in this part of the presentation. I wanted to just sort of ground, I guess, the presentation in who I am first. And I've broken this up into three parts: pre-uni, during uni and post-uni. And so on the left, you can see a little bit about who I am. You know, I migrated from Malaysian Borneo, eldest child, Asian. These all sound pretty innocuous, but they've shaped my experience of the world. They've shaped the energy that I have to put into particular interactions. They've pretty much shaped the person and the professional that I am. And if you've been along to any of the International Women's Day discussions this year, there was a lot of talk about intersectionality. And so this gives you a little bit of an insight to some of the intersections that I've, I guess, just have been a big part of my life. I wasn't always, or my family wasn't always, but in my lifetime and in my parents' lifetime, they've come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And that's, you know, largely due to my grandparents' displacement from China, and then from Borneo, and so the cultural loss, the intergenerational trauma that has come with that. I'm also an introvert, and those of you who are introverts might sort of relate to the fact that networking, I'm going to talk a little bit about networking in my presentation, so important to what we do, because our job as designers, as architects, you know, can I just have a show of hands? Who's an architect or student architect in the room? Yeah? Landscape architect? No? Yes? Urban designer? Okay, so largely architects, but any of those disciplines, we have to design collaboratively. And that takes a lot of energy if you're an introvert, probably less so if you're an extrovert, and you know, you get your energy from being around people. And that's why I've put that in there. The other stuff is, I don't need to say it, but in uni, look, my alma mater is University of Melbourne. Really love this place. I got into RMIT as well, but decided that the grounds of Melbourne were much more appealing to me. So I came here and I started 4 degrees and finished 3 of them. The 3 that I finished were planning and design, architecture and landscape architecture. I was a faculty board member for, I think, about 4 years. And then I've got listed in the uni and post-uni my jobs, and I won't go into them now, but I just wanted to show you that the jobs that I have, there's 5 of them only make up a minority of the points that are there. So only a minority, not a minority, but they're only part of the professional experience and the personal experience that I've had. And the right-hand side, I'll probably go into some of that a little bit later. But they're just there for you to sort of see that there is more than just the classroom, but there's also more than just, you know, working in a studio or working for a practice or a firm. The images down the bottom are things that inspired me during the pre-uni and uni phase, pop-up books, art installations, that really immersive stuff. So I think I kind of was training to be an architect without even realising it. You know, graphic novels, Korean cinema, actually any cinema that I could find at MIF, which I used to attend quite a lot when I was working in the city. And now that I'm back in the city, I'm attending again. So my first job was with Peter Statutory Architects up in Sydney. I was really drawn to his work, I guess, because of its simplicity, but also it is designed specifically for its environments. It's very, very Sydney style of architecture, no air conditioning, lots of, you know, passive ventilation. This probably looks really rudimentary to you guys now because this is sort of like 20 years ago. But back then, this was something that was aspirational, and it was something that was not really being talked a lot about in Melbourne, this idea of passive design. And so I worked with him for a year, and then had a really great time up there in these beautiful landscapes, these beautiful environments. Going for runs at Palm Beach, which you can see on the left-hand side there, swimming in the ocean pool. I think that might have been at Palm Beach or at Newport where the office was. And also working on these beautiful houses, like this house for an art collector shown bottom right. And then staying at Peter Stutch's own house, top right, babysitting his kids, because that's just what professional life was kind of like for me 20 years ago. And I took it all on as a learning experience. When I returned to Melbourne, I worked for Sean Godsall Architects, and that was just for a year. And I was a student at this point in time, so I did the first degree, the planning and design degree, worked for Peter Stutchbury for a full-time for a year, then came back to Melbourne and started what is effectively the Master of Architecture now, working for Sean Godsall part-time. And this was a wonderful experience in form making. Largely because it was part-time work, I was working on things like door schedules and fixtures and all of that really exciting stuff, which I thankfully have been able to avoid since then. And you might know him because he's done the work at Design Lab for RMIT, which is the image down the bottom. And a lot of the work that I did, aside from the sort of administrative side of architecture, was also helping to collate some of the documentation for the Al Croquis publication on him at that time. I was really ready for something else after working for those two practices. Amazing practices, beautiful work. But for me, coming from where I'd come from, I really, really wanted to work in the public realm, working for communities that can't necessarily afford architecture. And so at the same time that I was studying architecture, I also took up the Bachelor of Landscape Architecture to broaden what I could do. In my view, design doesn't stop at the building site or the building edge. It continues way beyond that. And I think you can sort of start to glean that much of my career has been unplanned. It's been incremental. I've just chased after what I've been really passionate about. And so where I ended up next was MGS Architects, and I started working on these, for me, really, really exciting large-scale plans. So up the top left, we've got a 20-year plan for Chapel Street and Toorak Road. Next to that, we've got a plan for an outdoor mall, restoring the riverbank in Werribee. And then we've got what was called a financial plan for Corio Norlane, one of the most underprivileged areas of the state, and this is just outside of Geelong. What needed, what could we do there? So it was like an opportunities plan to guide future investment in Corio Norlane. Bottom left was a project for what was then the Office of Housing, and so we teamed up with BKK, Taylor Cullity, Lethland, so TCL Studio, McBride, Charles Ryan, and developed in collaboration with a developer a bid for these three public housing sites in Carlton. It was an enormous project, and I think if anyone's ever had to participate in a developer bid, really, really tight time frames, a huge amount of work. You're basically developing, delivery drawings, so concept and delivery drawings as a single package to win and it's all priced, a competitive process. Next to that is community housing, but we also did the station redevelopment as well, a proposal for that. This is just a snippet of 7 years at this place. These were some of my favourite projects, but not all the projects I worked on, of course. And then the last one is the Monash Master Plan, which really played a huge role in the career to come. And I loved these projects. I felt like I'd found, something that I could be really proud of and passionate about. I'm always thinking about, if I'm on my deathbed, would I be happy to look back on this time and would it still be meaningful to me? And so that's always my barometer. I'm quite a macabre person for whether I'm in the right place or not. So my two objectives are: am I learning, and am I going to be proud of this at the end of my life? And so I was really proud, but I was also really scared that I was going to be a paper architect. These are 10, 20-year plans, and I just felt like I could really easily fall into into that place of designing plans that never went anywhere. I met my future employer in a meeting on the Monash Master Plan, and it turned out they were looking for someone, and so I put my hand up and ended up getting this job. This is what Monash University looked like, Clayton, in 2011 when I first started there. Has any hands up if you've been to Monash Clayton in the last 5 years? Yeah? Oh, great. So most of you know what I'm talking about. That's wonderful. So you can see a really pretty lacklustre campus. At the time, Monash University, one of the top-ranking universities for medicine, one of the top-ranking universities in the world for engineering and science. And you look at that, and we're all quite visual people, right? Like anyone in the public now is a visual person, just because of things like social media and the sort of information we have at our fingertips now, the way that we shop, it's all guided by visuals. And so a lot of what we ended up doing at Monash University was driven by the idea that these campuses aren't going to help us to improve our global ranking, and they also are not commensurate with the learning quality that is possible here. And so I came in having worked on the master plan, and then we couldn't just rest on that. We also introduced I introduced, because it was just myself for the first 5 years, a public art master plan, working with the then director of the Mama Art Gallery, a new design and development controls for landscape. So these are all enabling standards in addition to the master plan. I also formed alliances across the organisation, and was really, because I just didn't have any budget, I was like, all right, what can I influence? So I looked at the painting palette and said, oh, that is not very contemporary. What buildings are you painting next? Let's change the palette. We're no longer going to paint like for like. So developed a painting palette. And also, you know, whenever I was given a brief to just this space needs enlivening, can you just put some giant pot plants out there? I'd be like, well, we're not in France or Italy. That doesn't really work here. Let's do something else. And so then I got onto the phone to the director of art and said, help, I need something cheap and big, something to take everyone's focus away from these terrible sorts of landscapes, you know, and serve as a sort of like catalyst project for change for how good is design thinking, because it's transformative and it doesn't have to be expensive. And so that's how the Ronnie Van Hout you know, sculpture on campus came about, which is now a permanent commission, but at the time we borrowed it from the Melbourne Art Fair. We also introduced a university architect role, and that was filled by Rob McGorran, who you can see middle left, and then Shelley Penn more recently. And we introduced a design review panel, which in its early days included Rob, Shane Murray, who's the Dean of Architecture, Design and Art at Monash University, Perry Lethlean from TCL, and Peter Elliott, whom I'm sure you're familiar with. And then this is the change we ended up creating. It took a while. You know, it was sort of 5 years in before people said to me, so they went from going, oh, here comes the architect to add time and cost, they were talking about me, to then going, Joss, I get it now. I totally get why we should have a master plan, because all of a sudden those spaces turned from being vehicular dominated and nothing much else really, into something that was really, really a place where people wanted to be, where people felt proud to be, where people wanted to spend time and felt inspired to study. And so, you know, on the top right, you probably can't read it back from where you are, but we transformed 4 university campuses. There were 5 master plans, including an international master plan. We delivered over 4 kilometres of pedestrian walks, so 6 metre wide, granite pathways, 15 new buildings, blah, 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 blah. There's, you know, 300 plus refurbishments. And probably most notable of all was that we introduced a new architect selection committee, and it was no longer the same architects being deployed over and over again, and we opened up opportunities for over 40 different design practices, so emerging, middle scale, large scale, to actually, you know, design these places with us. And that, I think, is what has helped to give it a uniquely Monash feel. And that's just some more of it. The little inset boxes describe some of the impact of those spaces. I don't think in the 20 years prior that you would have seen much about Monash University Place and Excellence as a coupling altogether, but we were starting to see quite a lot of that in the last 5 years while I was there. This is one of those award-winning projects where we partnered with an artist, and so a lot of this has provided a bit of a template for the work that that has come, you know, since then as well. I might just go back, sorry. Yeah, so the key thing to the Monash Master Plan stuff was having a vision. And it was really hard work, but we also recorded our impact. And the vision side is so important if you want to bring people along on the journey. And so as a part of this work, one of the first things I did was to create a campaign for the Monash Master Plan. I didn't want it to be a dusty thing that sat on the shelf, and I knew how to write a brief because I'd come from, you know, consulting and had been on the other end of what it was like to receive a brief from a client. So we created this thing called It's Part of Our Monash Master Plan. Anything you do on the campus, whether you're an educator, whether you're the maintenance guy, whether you're a contractor for a new building, whatever, your touch on these campuses, it has an impact on the overall vision and opportunity of the master plan to succeed. And so then we had, like, you know, signage contractors calling us up and saying, I've had a request to do this and I don't think it aligns with the Monash Master Plan. that was how we actually got it going. That's how we succeeded with this, because there's no way that one team, like I went from being one person to then a team of 7, there's no way that we could implement all of this. And it was over, what have I got on there? It was over $1 billion worth of capital projects delivered in that time. So onto being visible, owning your contributions and giving back. And I feel like I've only, recently been able to do that. I think you reach a point, a lot of your time as a student and an early graduate is about just feeling overwhelmed. I'm not sure if that's the case with you guys. It's about feeling like, oh my God, you've just got so much to learn, and you've still got so much to learn, and you maybe don't know enough. That was the feeling I had. There was a point in my career, there were multiple points in my career where people told me, Joss, you know more than you think. And it wasn't until recently where I felt like, actually, I do know. Part of it, the own your contributions bit was, I was seeing people starting to take ownership of the work that we were doing at Monash. I was seeing our collaborators say that this was their idea and this was their idea, and I was sort of like, well, that's not really fair, because actually that was 2 years of us pitching for that project and saying that project is absolutely essential, and you don't get to just take that away from us. And the design, influence isn't just on the practitioner, the design practice side of the table, it's all around the table. And so a lot of my public talks have been about saying that, but also about how we can not just change the discourse on design, but also how we can, strengthen it and diversify it. And so this is some of the stuff that I contributed over, I've contributed over the last 5 or so years. So one of the big things around sort of like trying to own our contributions, own the university's work in this space, ownership of design, was to hold the largest ever precinct offering for Open House Melbourne. We opened up 45 different sites across 4 campuses, and we said, we are design leaders. It's not just about the people we're commissioning, we're a smart client. And sharing some of the knowledge about that, how, yes, the designers we were collaborating with, amazing work and fantastic and valuable work, but there's a whole other stitching exercise that goes around that, a whole other, business case building side that supports that. That's been really crucial to the work. This also applies to self-learning, like the Association of University Architects is something that I pursued. So bottom middle pictures, that was something that I sort of chanced upon by accident. A colleague of mine at Monash University mentioned it because they had met a member there, and it was one of the most sort of life-changing events of, it just really put into perspective what incredible work we do in Australia. They just hadn't seen anything like it, and this is a collection of the best university architects in America, from Princeton to Stanford to Yale. They were all represented at this space, and they were blown away by what we were doing on our campuses. And what we were doing on our campuses is just part of the story of tertiary campuses in Australia. And so, I've spent quite a bit of effort in the last few years trying to give back, but also trying to sort of increase the visibility of design outside of regular practice. So removing some of the barriers that Rory talked about. This was another presentation that I gave, and I said before, my career has been sort of iterative. It's also been very serendipitous. Rob Adams happened to be in the audience for this presentation that I gave to the Australian Landscape Conference, and he called me up 3 months later to say, I have been thinking about you as a result of this presentation, where I talked about the role of client as all of these different, in doing all of these different works around enabling design excellence. So each of those headings that you probably can't see say, client as fundraiser, client as brief writer, client as change manager, about how, having designers as clients can enable transformation. Basically that's how I heard about the job. I wasn't actually looking to move, but I heard about the job and ended up, interviewing well for it, obviously. And then another thing that I do when the opportunity presents is to be a juror and an advisor on competitions, and also to, I guess, design reviews as well. And this is just a couple of those competitions. And they're all really fun, so I highly recommend doing it. Teaching, I don't teach a lot anymore. I give guest lectures like this, and I really miss it because I think it's fabulous. You know, and it's such a privilege to be able to sort of interact with students in this way, and to share some of the experiences that you've had. But also it helps to consolidate, you know, what knowledge you have for sharing. So that's just a bit of a snippet of some of those things. Lean into challenge. So the start at the City of Melbourne was really challenging. And it is a really challenging kind of job and role. So I started at the City of Melbourne on the first day of the first lockdown. And this is what Melbourne was like. And I thought, I had sort of been thinking about Melbourne up to this point, thinking, all right, so much wonderful stuff has been achieved that I've, you know, been privileged to see Melbourne sort of going from its tumbleweeds phase, from being a central business district to a central activities district, alive, you know, day and night, thriving art scene, thriving music scene. All of those things just were gone, like almost overnight. And I was meeting my team through Zoom. And I was, you know, met with them via Zoom for 2 years. And that was the start of my job in the City of Melbourne. This is an introduction to my team. So we're a group of urban designers, landscape architects, architects and industrial designers. And there's about 45 of us all up. And I'm just going to skip through them quickly. You'll get a chance to, you know, view the slides in your own time at a later date anyway. This is just some of the work that we managed to achieve during lockdown. We weren't just sitting around twiddling our thumbs. We were thinking about, all right, those bike lanes that we anticipated would take 10 years to roll out in our transport strategy, we can get them all out now because all the cars are at home. And so we had 40 kilometres of new dedicated bike lanes, and you can see some of them there. So they're not competing with cars. They're not competing with, you know, driveways and things like that. They're clearly articulated and separated, some of them more so than the picture there. We've rolled out 20 kilometres of those in 2 years. And that's, you know, the authority approvals required to do that, which we were able to fast track as a result of COVID, was fantastic. We also undertook some pilot, you know, temporary works to our little streets. So that's the markings that you can see on the left of the slide, a graphic that was designed by Marcus Lee, an Indigenous designer, to help, you know, signalise that these are pedestrian-oriented streets. And we're not there yet. This is a trial. This is the whole, you know, this is a really important part of city design, is you're not going to get stuff, or any design actually, you're not going to get stuff perfectly right the first time, but it's important to give it a go and to have an evidence base for it. And so that's what we did. And then some of the learnings from all of this stuff, the outdoor dining, which we, you know, created to enable social distancing and enabling our businesses to thrive, are now feeding into our Future Streets framework. This is just a little bit about data and how we collect it. To summarise really quickly, we try to collect data in really nuanced ways. A thing that we introduced last year was our neighbourhood portals, and that seeks to break down the idea that the City of Melbourne is homogenous, that we have 9 distinct neighbourhoods, 14 suburbs, and that each of those neighbourhoods is quite different. So what do I mean by that? I mean that in East Melbourne, the median age of residents is 41. In the Central Business District, or in Carlton, where we are now, actually, are we in Parkville right here? Parkville. So in Carlton, it's 29, I think. Yeah, 29. So quite a big difference. And then the household makeup, the proportion of people born here, overseas, all of these different variables then help us to sort of better understand, well, what specific facilities and services are needed to best suit that particular neighbourhood. And so that's something that we opened up last year to collect more in-tune data with. One of my favourite things about being at the City of Melbourne is that our work is highly consultative. Everything we do, it's in draft form or concept design, and then it goes out to the public to have a say on, and it does it through a website called Participate Melbourne, which is the thing on the right-hand side. And some of those things are just the things that you can see there are just some of the things that we're sort of consulting on at the moment. Our Design Excellence program, which Rory briefly mentioned before, is also something that we're leading, and I won't go through it in detail other than to say we presented it recently to Future Melbourne Committee, which is the big decision-making forum at Council, and managed to secure an ongoing program for the Melbourne Design Review Panel, which is fantastic, which means that design thinking, design values, stay at the forefront of any decisions on significant development in the City of Melbourne. So that's just more stats about some of the projects we've reviewed and stats on what they are valued at to date. These are some of the strategies and guidelines that we use. And so, the two main ones that we're responsible for are the Central Melbourne Design Guide and the design and construction standards in the purple. And they're actually both tied to local law. So you cannot ignore these design standards. They actually carry quite a bit of weight behind them. A stat, so I did say that stats drive a lot of the work that we do. The World Health Organisation states that a minimum of 9 square metres of open space per person recommends that for a healthy city. In parts of the municipality, i.e. Southbank, our densities in that location, particularly in recent years, are akin to Hong Kong. And what we're seeing in those locations that we've got an open space provision of 1.5 square metres per person. And that's not a lot when you also add in the fact that we've got residents, but we also have a visitor community that also rely on this open space. And so these projects, which I'll just flip through, are aimed at taking space that is grey and turning it into space that is green. So underutilised car parking, underutilised roads, underutilised depot space to turn into things like playgrounds, pedestrian and cycle walks, etc. And this just illustrates some of those types of projects. That image on the right-hand side, you can sort of see the scale of that just one project can deliver. So up the top is what the condition was like before we then went in and pulled out some of the streets. This is a project in North Melbourne and turned it into a central park. This is Rory's favourite project. So this is Rocks on Wheels, which we designed with the artist Mike Hewson. And this is, addressing the fact that children in these environments in Southbank, they're very underprivileged when it comes to open space. And open space, the ability to connect with nature, to learn how to socialise, to make decisions, to assess risk, those opportunities are really, really curtailed for inner city children. And so this landscape was about doing that, and it builds on some of the learnings that we've made at Royal Park, Nature Play at Royal Park as well. We also do art installations, so Australian birds you might have seen on St Kilda Road, we did that with Julian Oppie, and then Chimney and Store, which is also down on the north bank of the Yarra River with Tom Nicholson. You may have heard a little bit about the Green Line project. This is the Lord Mayor's favourite project. 4 kilometres of the north bank of the Yarra River Birrarung will be transformed into a linear cycle and pedestrian path, but most importantly, it will seek to restore some of the ecology of those places along its length. And this is all happening in discussion with traditional owners, and they play a really important role in how we're doing this and what form it will take. That Greater Green program that I mentioned, aimed at enhancing and increasing the amount of open space in the municipality. We're also achieving it with private developers. So they're all required to provide open space contributions, and this is a former road space that we were able to basically give up to the project, so it stays in public hands, but the development paid for the conversion or the transformation of that roadway into a park, which you can see in these photos here. Housing is a really big thing for the city. If we don't address the shortfall in housing, we'll have 24,000 homeless people by 2036, and that's a really, really scary thing. And the estimated shortfall currently is about 6,000 beds. And so this slide seeks to show you some of the stuff that we're already doing to address that really big issue. So in the pink, that's a location where we've delivered 500 build-to-rent apartments. It's not perfect. It's only studio 1 and 2 beds, so not really great for families with 2 kids, and I know some of you in the audience might have that. So there's stuff that we still need to do, but at least we're doing build-to-rent housing. That wasn't there 5-10 years ago. The image that you can see with the greenery on top and the brick apartments, that's micro apartments. So that's short stay apartments. We've got 110 of them there in partnership with the provider. Below that, so the white building is a project called Make Room, and that will deliver 50 short stay crisis accommodation beds for people in need, people who are sleeping rough, as a sort of transition, as a stepping stone towards more permanent housing. This is just some of the stuff we're doing with state government. So structure plans in our renewal areas, Arden and Macaulay and Fisherman's Bend, the metro tunnels. I do want to highlight that the 2 top right images, they are about improving the participation of women and gender diverse persons in sport, and replacing really outdated facilities to enable that inclusion. And then we've got trial floating wetlands, which we've partnered with state government on. So the last slide, the last section is be a boss. And I'm so lucky that I am a boss, and I feel really arrogant saying that, but you have to own it, right? You have to own that. So I do everything I can to really work for the causes that I believe in. That is really hard for someone who is introverted, and also someone who's come from a background like mine, where you were taught to stay out of trouble because of the backgrounds that my parents came from. Stay out of trouble, be seen, not heard, all of those sorts of things. So it's a real growing thing for me. It's also been something that I've been really delighted to learn a lot from my team. So one of the things that we're really passionate about is gender equity. And that's really important for everyone's sake, not just for women. Community, we're also really passionate about, connecting with those people who don't participate normally in council processes. So children, and we ran an event for children to imagine a future for Melbourne, and Rory's kid was there, so that was wonderful. And we were also doing a lot more with our traditional owners outside of project engagement. We're really, really interested in building deep and meaningful relationships with our Aboriginal community and our Aboriginal collaborators to do meaningful work. And then the last one is just balance, guys. Work is just one thing. Hopefully it's just one thing in your life. Some people, work can sustain them, and that's great. That's really good, but just know what sustains you. These are the things that sustain me. So I have a small family, time with friends, they're really special to me, but also something that I'm working on at the moment is just getting back into going outdoors and being under the sun and climbing. That's probably the one thing that makes me really zen. I think that's it. Thank you.